Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers.
And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 147. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Friday. Steelers Nation. Dave, the Pittsburgh Steelers broke mandatory minicamp on Thursday. Now is the team's 6-week layoff until reporting to training camp July 23rd. First practice July 24th. How you doing watching any of the U.S. Open coverage out here in Oakmont?
I haven't really. I will probably start tuning in a little bit today. I think that coverage here begins here in a little bit. I haven't really watched anything up until this point, but obviously is monumental because it being in the area, and I think a lot of local guys are obviously out covering that thing. So I'll probably tune in throughout the weekend here, being how it is a major and all. So definitely paid attention last night and watched, boy, what a great Stanley Cup finals this has been so far between Edmonton and Florida. So I've been tuned into that. That was quite the game last night. And I watched a little bit of the Pirates almost win last night against the Cubs. So, you know what almost winning means.
It means an L, but
yeah,
at least they're competitive a little more lately.
Yeah.
I'm not a big golf guy, but it's something about it being 20 minutes from your house makes you tune in a little bit more. And my impression every time they do a flyover of Oakmont is I go, hey, I've been in that Sheets before. There's a Sheets right next to the Oakmont golf course. That is my commentary on that. But good luck to everyone this weekend. All right, Dave, let's dive into the Pittsburgh Steelers. As I said, minicamp wrapping up this week. Mike Tomlin speaking with media to conclude minicamp yesterday. Was, of course, asked about the T.J. Watt situation, missing all 3 days of mandatory minicamp. Tomlin, he spoke about it on the first day, spoke about it on the last day, downplayed things, said he's optimistic a deal will get done. When that happens, he does not know. Even if he did, I'm sure he would not tell us, Dave. But I think the team has presented a sense of calm and at least the appearance this is not a contentious, messy situation the way we're seeing with Trey Hendrickson and everything happening in Cincinnati right now. So the belief is from the team, from national reporters, some local media, a deal will get done at some point.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've been saying as well here throughout this thing. I would be absolutely shocked if at some point they don't get a deal done with him. Mike Tomlin, just says, hey, you guys see how, understand how negotiations go, and he's been in contact, and he's not going to disclose what things have been said and all like that, but goes on to say he wants a deal done, the team wants a deal done, and that's primarily why he has no concern really at this time. He was kind of asked point blank too, whether or not he thinks this will roll into training camp, and he's not going to speculate on all that right now. So we'll just have to see how this thing rolls out through the rest of the summer here. I wouldn't imagine we'll get, as we said the other day, I wouldn't imagine we'll hear about a deal coming together within the next couple of weeks, maybe not even the next 3.5, 4 weeks. But the closer you get to training camp, you would obviously probably like to try to get that thing done. Doesn't seem like, they've got everything else done. Aaron Rodgers under contract. It's pretty cut and dry as far as the rest of this stuff goes. We just sit and wait now at this point. Once again, I think they'll get things done with him. It's just a matter of when.
I agree. I think that's been the consensus from most people who have commented on the situation, ourselves included. To me, the more interesting question is not will a deal get done, but what that deal looks like, and also does this thing get messy? And I think one piece of good news that hopefully will avoid any messiness is, as you mentioned, Dave, Mike Tomlin saying he has been in contact with T.J. Watt. And so the fact there are some open lines of dialogue, I imagine is good news. And this situation isn't necessarily getting into a situation where it's going to be really, really toxic. It's just business where Watt stays away for the reasons we mentioned. Why show up to minicamp and do nothing when you can be at home with your family, your new kid, and hang out there? So hopefully Watt missing is a statement, obviously, but it's more of just a pure tactical business statement more so than anything else that could lead into some really, bad feelings and bad blood between both sides.
Yeah. And you just hate to see this thing potentially get kind of contentious and put Watt in a position where he has to think about holding out at training camp, like we said the other day here. So it doesn't sound like overall a lot of people, players on the team or Mike Tomlin or anybody within the organization are too worried about this thing ultimately getting done. Once again, it's a matter of when it gets done. And, once again, you, you really would like to see this thing wrapped up by the start of training camp so it doesn't linger into training camp and then players are being asked about it. And, they don't like talking about other players' money and that kind of thing there. So we'll sit and wait and see what transpires. But once again, I think the end result of this is it gets done. It's just a matter of when.
I know we've had this discussion before, but I've heard a couple of national media types, including Ian Rappaport, hint, not say definitively, but hint that T.J. Watt's deal will be less than Myles Garrett's contract at $40 million average yearly value. I know devils in the details of these deals, Dave, in terms of fully guaranteed money and structure, etc. But can you reiterate your stance? Do you think Watt's deal, once it gets done, tops Garrett's or comes in just below?
I have to feel like he's asking for more than that, and whether or not he gets it, is obviously two different things. But I have no reason at this point to think, once again, that he's not that his side of the table's angling to be not only top Myles Garrett, but be the highest paid highest paid non-quarterback in the league. So, that's where I think he's at least angling, and I have no reason to believe that it won't go in that direction. Obviously, if it doesn't get to that point, then it's not. I wouldn't imagine to be too far off of what Garrett is right now. But I'll from where I sit right now, this far out, I still have no reason to change my stance of thinking that it wouldn't be higher than Myles Garrett.
If you had to guess, I know we're all from the outside. We don't know the talks and the reported offer on the table, what that looks like for TJ Watt. Clearly not to his liking, but is that the crux of the issue, do you think? Because I made the point that I think Watt is pretty prideful and doesn't want to come in below Myles Garrett, the guy that he's always compared to, the guy that they came into the draft together in 2017. They played each other twice a year. They're always compared. Garrett last year saying, Watt, you're number 2, I'm number 1. I have to think that's got to be a real sticking point for TJ Watt as a point of pride.
Well, that and the guaranteed money, obviously, because last time he got the first 3 years done too, and it's not just about the bragging rights of the average per year. He wants some security to go along with it. Quite honestly,
do you think that'd be an issue though? Do you think Pittsburgh wouldn't offer the first 3 years guaranteed again?
I think that could potentially be a talking point. Maybe they only want to go 2 this time.
Okay. They went 2 on DK Metcalf?
They went this year and next year on DK Metcalf.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when Minka got his deal done, that was the first 2?
That was the first 2. Yeah. So at a minimum, you would expect the first 2 years to get done. I have to go back and look at the Myles Garrett. And then there's the whole cash flow, the new money cash flow as well too. So it's usually a lot of different factors that go into these things. It's the average per year, the new money average. The obviously the fully guaranteed money, and then the cash flow schedule along with that as well.
Right. There's certainly a lot of elements to these contracts, and it is more just the overall value of the deal. But I think knowing that's the public thing that gets talked about so much, the average yearly value, where you get slotted in, are you the highest paid player, are you number 2? I don't think Watt wants to sign the deal and then see a bunch of headlines of TJ Watt becomes the second highest paid edge rusher in football, only behind Myles Garrett, and to see that headline 47 times. So I know that's only one element of it and maybe one of the least important parts of the deal, but it is the most public part of the deal, and I bet you that's a sticking point.
Yeah. Yeah. But deadline sporadic. The biggest thing in my head right now is just whether or not this thing just gets done at the start of training camp, or does it linger into kind of like the last year's or last time situation with him, where it rolled out almost through the start of the regular season there. Now, we've seen him take a little bit of different stance this time around, obviously with not attending mandatory minicamp, and he did last time. Will that impact his thoughts on saying, well, last time I went to training camp and was a hold in, it took forever to get this thing done. Maybe I'll get their attention a little bit more by missing the start of training camp. Obviously, you don't see that happen a lot around the league nowadays. And as we talked, the Steelers' stance generally has been over the years that not in camp, we don't negotiate. So in my heart of hearts, I want to think that he'll be there at the start of camp. But in my heart of hearts, I kind of thought he'd be there at mini camp, just not do anything either. So we got 5.5 more weeks to talk about this.
Right, and you're correct in deadlines per action, but there should be some feeling for Pittsburgh to get this deal done ahead of a Micah Parsons or an Aiden Hutchinson, or maybe even Trey Hendrickson, but I don't think Hendrickson's going to get quite in that $35 million plus that's the market's kind of commanded this year. He certainly won't top Myles Garrett, so that may be less of an issue, but it could potentially constrain the market a little bit more. So I think what we'll report to training camp, I can't guarantee that with him skipping minicamp, but I think given Pittsburgh's longstanding philosophy and rule, as you said, of we don't talk until you're at training camp. Hines Ward found that out years ago. I think T.J. Watt will be there.
Now that we're on the backside of this Aaron Rodgers stuff and everybody talking about will he or won't he help and blah blah blah, obviously the fallout from all that at this point. I imagine another few days of that will surface through the major media, but then moving forward into the off season, I would imagine that most of the major media talk will be about the Watt thing, and you'll see these instigators.
Florio's going to write something, that.
Exciters about all, they should trade T.J. Watt, and I mean that's just I can't see any instance where T.J. Watt's going to get dealt. It's just a matter of getting this deal done.
Yeah, it's just off-season fodder for people to suggest that stuff. Whether or not they should is a different story, but in terms of the will they, won't they, there's no chance T.J. Watt gets dealt.
Everybody talking to, okay, yeah, it'd be silly. They're handicapping themselves and all like that, especially if they were guaranteed money for 2 or 3 more years and all like that. Even if you guarantee the first 3 years and the cash flow when it comes to a new TJ Watt deal, it's not going to hamstring, in my opinion. Obviously you want to get a good return on your investment, but it's not like it's going to handicap this team from a cash or a cap perspective overall, especially with if you get a deal done this offseason, what his cap charge would be relative to whatever the salary cap ends up being next year. You look at what this team looks like they're on course to spend with cash not only this year but in the third year of the 3-year period of the CBA. That doesn't seem to be an issue there. The obviously, in other words, getting a deal done with him, even making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And even if you were to go 3 full guaranteed years on this, it's not going to hamper the team as far as roster building goes. In my opinion, the big fear is if you get into, say, that third year and you've got a guy that's only getting 8 sacks and missing some games with injury and not getting obviously a good return on your investment. But they did go out obviously and draft a guy in Sawyer. You got another couple years, obviously, or at least 1 more year past this year with Nick Herbig on the roster. You've got Highsmith still under contract and all like that. So I don't buy into the argument that they would severely handicap the roster by, look, they said, what's the talk been about Cam Hayward? They should have never done what they did with Cam Hayward last year, even though all they did was essentially move money around. But Cam Hayward still came out at his age and had arguably one of his best seasons over the last handful of them here. So there's no reason to think that there's not at least 2 more good seasons in TJ Watt moving forward.
Just looking down the road, since you mentioned it, Dave, is there any chance that Nick Herbig gets an extension? Not this year. I know he's not eligible, but he's a guy. He's playing behind Highsmith and Watt. He'd probably start on a bunch of teams if the depth chart was different. Is he one of those guys that'll just inevitably play out his rookie deal and then walk and go try to get big money somewhere else to be a starter, knowing there's really no way to crack this lineup of Highsmith and Watt?
You have to think if you're him, especially if T.J. Watt gets re-upped, and especially with them drafting Sawyer. And let's see, this is what, year 3 for Herbig, so he would be entering his final year of his rookie contract this time next year. I really, it kind of feels like almost sort of like a Calvin Austin type situation. I mean, yeah, as well as Nick Herbig has even played to this point, he hasn't in totality played a ton of snaps, so he's still trying to to show what his maximum value is. If things go the way the Steelers hope that they go, his snaps would still be somewhat muted overall. These next 2 years on top of it. So I think, at least from where we sit right now, barring any major injuries or anything like that, sure, we might be talking about this time next year whether or not this team should extend Nick Herbig. But I think that, at least right now, that's where it would end, and that he would be looking to go into his final year of his rookie contract, looking to prove a lot, then potentially hit free agency and see where that goes from there. So I would, it's real hard to look into your crystal ball, this far out. But if I would have to guess, when the 2026 season gets underway in week 1, that Nick Herbig has not signed an extension.
That's fair. And what incentive is there for Herbig to do some mid-level deal instead of betting on himself, having a great year, entering free agency in his prime at however old he'll be, 26 or so, and go out there and get paid the way that some Pittsburgh Steelers pass rushers have gotten paid in the past? So that's a down-the-road question, I know, but a little different topic and one we haven't discussed so far, so I wanted to pick your brain. Maybe one reason why you drafted Jack Sawyer, to really make sure there's a good rotation and almost conveyor belt of outside linebackers, just one moving down the track, in order. Because if you lose Herbig in a couple of years, and then by that point Sawyer's in year 3, developed, and hopefully could theoretically step right in.
Look what happened to my boy Andrew Van Ginkel. That's if I'm Nick Herbig, I'm kind of looking at that. That's a guy that first couple years looked like, okay, he's kind of on that path of, that can be a good backup, and obviously contribute maybe a little bit on special teams and all like that. And then obviously he gets the opportunity and blows up a little bit, and he's like, what is he, like the 10th highest paid edge rusher in the NFL right now at $23 million? So if I'm Nick Herbig, I gotta Andrew Van Ginkel's my spirit animal. He's my poster boy, because they're kind of built a little bit alike, and kind of coming out of college a little bit underrated, if you will, a lot underrated really. And if I'm Herbig, I'm thinking that I could parlay this thing with a couple more good seasons into maybe a top 15, top 10 type edge rusher contract.
Sure. So something to think about for down the road. Let's go back to Mike Tomlin. What else he had to say non-Watt related? He gave a brief injury update on the team, and all seems good, Dave. Mike Tomlin saying there's no injuries that will impact this team to training camp. Doesn't mean that somebody couldn't pop up on active PUP come that first day. Someone gets nicked up in off-season training. You know how it goes sometimes. But overall health of the team, besides losing Darnell Parham during OTAs to that torn Achilles, that injury aside, Pittsburgh seemingly in good health.
Yeah, you hate to lose a guy like Parham and all like that, but it seems like the damage was minimal overall. Now, look, there have been seasons in the past where you get closer to the training camp and you're writing up those articles that say, nobody's expected to open up camp on the active PUP list, and then you get to camp, and then there's 2 play. Well, Mike Tomlin holds that first first press conference, and then lo and behold, you got 2 or 3 people on that list. But y'all take him for his word at this point that, as things sit right now, it doesn't look like, health is going to be a big issue come the start of training camp, specifically maybe add the active PUP list. But is anybody going to fall down on their bike or anything? Or didn't that happen with Minka a couple years ago? So you just keep your fingers crossed and everybody trains responsibly, doesn't have any accidents, and you keep that good health going into start of training camp. And then lo and behold, when Mike Tomlin meets the media and we get the first transaction sheet coming out of the start of training camp, that nobody's going to active PUP.
It would imply that Cole Holcomb and Cameron Johnston, 2 players hurt last year, are not going to be on PUP. Also, DeMarvin Leal coming off their neck injury. So it sounds like all those guys have been healthy and working. I know Danny Smith talked about Cameron Johnston being in great shape, doing extra work. Tomlin himself talked about how aggressively Johnson attacked rehab while still being a good teammate and still being engaged with the team, helping Corliss Waitman, who replaced him throughout the season. So he didn't specifically name those names besides Johnston, but it would imply with good health, that means good health for Holcomb, Leal, and the like.
Yeah. And obviously things have been positive on Holcomb for a little bit now, and sounds like Cameron Johnston is on the backside of his his rehab. Mike Tomlin, in fact, was asked specifically about Cameron Johnston and talked about just the manner that he's attacked his rehab and how engaged he was throughout last season, helping a guy like Corliss Waitman. And look, I mean, Waitman, I thought did a reputable job last year, and we've seen the Steelers in the past be able to deal away a punter, or at least try to deal away a punter last couple of years. So I think you got a guy definitely. Should Johnston have any sort of a setback, you got a guy you can fall back on in Waitman. But overall, with those 2 guys that you mentioned in Holcomb and Johnston, it sounds like they've had good summers or springs.
In Waitman, by the way, there's a good article in the Trib said he just gave away the number 8 jersey he was wearing to Aaron Rodgers for free. Didn't ask for any money, didn't want anything in return. He said he's just happy to be a Steeler, happy to still keep a single-digit number. He will now wear the old Russell Wilson number 3. And so Waitman just giving that to Rodgers, which I thought was pretty cool.
That certainly, that kind of stuff endears him to fans of the team, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Guy. That's an easy guy to root for as well, too. There's a lot of them on this roster that might not end up being on the 53, but you definitely pay attention to if they leave Pittsburgh and go elsewhere. And easy guy to endear yourself to.
No question. Waitman's a guy that can punt in the NFL. I think he's proven that. He can hold. He can be on a roster. If that does not end up being Pittsburgh, I think he'll be somewhere at some point throughout 2025. Last thought on Holcomb. I know he is now, 18 months plus removed from that knee injury, but could they take the same approach as Corey Trice in training camp, the way they did with Trice last year, where they limit and manage Holcomb's reps early on and then try to ramp him up after that maybe second week or so of the summer? I wonder if that's going to be the approach, where he's active and he's working every day, but are they going to let him be full bore in terms of snap count? I wonder how they're going to handle him as he kind of works back and gets in the pads for the first time once those pads come that 5th training camp practice.
The way he talked about late last season, and obviously they had opened up his 21-day window, and even though he said he probably could have. It just feels like he's enough removed now that I would at least like to think, based on what's out there right now, that once training camp gets underway, you just turn him loose. But
right,
we'll obviously see.
Yeah, just something to watch, something on my checklist once we get to training camp. Anything else from Mike Tomlin, Dave, that he talked about yesterday?
The heat.
Right.
Turning the heat up.
Don't beat the heat is the philosophy for Mike Tomlin. That's why those practices that were in the morning last year are now back to their old school original 1:55 start time. Mike Tomlin saying that it wasn't hot enough when they did the practices last year. Guys weren't getting acclimated to the weather properly, and so that's the reason why they're going back to the afternoon model. And for those who have attended training camp, it may not be the dry heat of Vegas or down there in Florida, but it can get real hot and real muggy in Latrobe basically every single day. So that's the reason why the practices were moved back.
Was he ever asked about why there was only 6 OTAs this year throughout this summer
He was not.
or spring? That's one thing I kind of wondered, and it doesn't seem like he was ever asked about that.
When they moved the practices to the morning, Tomlin said last year the reason for that was because the schedule would get too compacted with these late or afternoon practices. They would end around 5 o'clock. Guys wouldn't be able to get dinner. We had meetings. It just became, too much of an issue. I wonder if they're going to solve that some way this year, because that seems to be a bigger issue to me than beating the heat. If you have an issue of guys not getting either enough calories or being able to get all their work in a reasonable timeline, that I think would take precedent over you practicing in some muggy weather. But I wonder if they're going to try to balance those things out this year.
All right, we'll definitely see on that. And I guess in totality, we got two. I think we were maybe expecting 3 Tomlin media sessions this past week, but we only got 2.
Right, we got the one on Tuesday and the one on Thursday. I think that was it from Mike Tomlin. Anything? Well, let's go to this now. Let's go to kind of a different story that wasn't coming out of minicamp. We'll come back to that here in a moment. Jonathan Jones was on the Pushing the Pile podcast. There's so many podcasts, I lose track of which is which. It's the one on CBS Sports with Kyle Long. And Jones had made a pretty clear comment about Pittsburgh. They're looking for playmakers. They're shopping around and asking teams and inquiring at the very least. But also, according to Jones, they are, quote, lowballing teams and offers right now. And Jones said his team realizes they need another pass catcher, need an offensive weapon. He said that could be a tight end, could be a receiver. Pittsburgh has had links and interest in both. So that was interesting commentary there, Dave, to hear that the Pittsburgh is casting that wide net, and B, as of right now, lowballing teams along the way.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder at times. I've been a big fan of Jonathan Jones over the years, especially when he was more of a local guy, and especially when he would cover pro days up in the Carolina area, and got a lot of good info on him. I think he's really kind of the only one reporting that at this point. But just from a logical standpoint, overall, I mean, why would you this early in the off season throw your best offer out there, right? So,
Right.
I just think overall, it makes sense. Are the Steelers indeed looking for another playmaker, whether it be a wide receiver, tight end? I mean, I think at least from connecting the dots over the course of the last couple of weeks with the interest in Jonnu Smith and supposedly at least calling to check in on Pitts and bringing in Gabe Davis and all those kind of things. I think it's obvious that, and Omar Khan would tell you anyway, we're always looking to build, to make our roster better. So I'm not going to get too caught up in that actual report. And once again, this is a time of year where you don't normally see a lot of deals, I think, in the past. And as we talked about several times, when it comes to the Steelers, once they break mandatory minicamp, which they have now at this point, if you look at the 90 or 91 man roster over the years, and then fast forward to the week 1 of the regular season, 1, 2, sometimes even 3 players that weren't even with the team throughout the summer wind up being on the 53-man roster. So, as we've talked a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, I will be surprised if there's not at least one player that's not currently under contract that winds up on the 53-man roster, and perhaps even as many as 2. So, doing the process of elimination, it's more likely, I think, to be offensive side of the football, and more than likely to be either a wide receiver or a tight end.
I know the lowballing part of that commentary and report would grab the headlines, and it did, and we wrote about that. But as you said, that is not really a cause for concern. That is just how negotiations work. You don't lead with your best offer. You certainly don't do that in June. You kind of feel out who's maybe even willing to entertain deals, trading a certain player. You don't offer your best deal in June. Teams aren't really generally interested in making deals this time of year. Like you said, they want to evaluate their own, make sure they're healthy, all that kind of stuff. So this is more of a feeling out time. And if you can get some team to bite on a low ball offer, then fantastic. But I think the more interesting part was just more recognition and more reporting that Pittsburgh is looking pretty high and low for an offensive weapon. And that runs counter to what Omar Khan said when he talked about post George Pickens trade. Oh, we like our guys. This is not like last year. We're happy internally. We trust in Roman and Calvin, etc. Doesn't seem like they're actually thinking like that. They want to add somebody else, and they should, and that's a good thing. So yeah, the lowballing part to me is a flashy word to use, and it generated a lot of reaction on social media. But I think the more interesting aspect of it is Pittsburgh's pretty thorough search already, pretty much right after the Pickens trade of looking for somebody else.
I think over the next 5.5 weeks, with the Terry McLaurin situation in Washington, that will prompt some of these talking heads and exciters, if you will, to Steelers should trade for Terry McLaurin. Look, I'm a huge Terry McLaurin fan and have been, and I know you have been as well too. I think he's a very talented player, but I just can't help but think that Washington ends up getting that straightened out with him. I would be absolutely shocked, A, if McLaurin's traded, and B, if McLaurin is traded, if it winds up being the Steelers. There's also, we've talked a little bit here and there about, Chris Olave and his situation with New Orleans. I guess if you want to put on a probability scale, I would definitely make that more probable than Terry McLaurin. That said, though, I don't see anything happening there. I think more realistically, when you're talking about players currently under contract right now, it's easy to draw the dots over to Alan Lazard and the Jets, and be interesting to see. I would definitely put Alan Lazard probability way ahead than an Olave or a McLaurin or anything along those lines. There, we'll probably continue to have the talks about, where instead of where's Waldo, where's Gabe Davis for the rest of this summer. Outside of Gabe Davis and Alan Lazard, I suppose maybe you can keep one eye looking at what's going on over there in Green Bay. But even so, that feels like if anything were to potentially happen over there, that would probably be more of a training camp winding down, kind of right before the season type situation over there. And then, the whole Jonnu Smith thing we'll obviously be keeping our eye on. I don't think Kyle Pitts is going to be in the plans for the Steelers. So, I think if you're building a short list at this time of potential, quote unquote playmakers the Steelers could add by week 1, specifically at either a tight end or a wide receiver position, I think it's in whatever order you want to put them in. Gabe Davis, Alan Lazard, I don't know, maybe a Romeo Doubs or a Jonnu Smith. I think those would be 4 names to potentially keep the biggest eyes on if this team was going to add a quote unquote playmaker outside.
That makes sense. I just wonder about those unknown unknowns. Is there somebody lurking that we're not even thinking or talking about that may surprise us? Omar Khan has surprised us a time or two before the DK Metcalf trade. Really, no one had connected Pittsburgh to Metcalf before that happened. There was some loose talk just because Pittsburgh, needed a receiver and Metcalf was on the block, but there wasn't a whole lot. It was all about, he wants to go somewhere warm. He wants to go play for the Chargers or something like that was all the talk at that time. So I just wonder, is there somebody hiding in the shadows that we're not even considering right now? And you just get that Schefter tweet at some point in August of Pittsburgh trading for X player.
Of those 4 players I just mentioned, will any of them be Steelers by week 1?
It's logical to think one of them would be. I've kind of come to expect sometimes the unexpected, and you never know exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. But it's certainly fair to say and think one of those guys will become a Steeler.
Especially one of them's not under contract right now, Gabe Davis, right? So
right, and he would play for the Chiefs. He played for a minimum level deal, so that makes it pretty easy to connect those dots.
All right, so once again, we'll watch that, something to pay attention to over the next 5.5 weeks. But will something get done by training camp? We'll see. But those four at least seem to have at least level of plausibility, probability.
I think Pitts would make a level of sense, but the price tag I think is just going to be too high. I can't see the Falcons trading him for a day 3 pick, and I can't see Pittsburgh giving up a day 2 pick for him.
I agree.
Speaking of receivers, I know we mentioned this on the podcast late in the episode. Wednesday was coming in as we were wrapping up the show. Wide receivers coach Zach Izzani declaring Calvin Austin III, this team's number 2 starting receiver. To me, that's a little more in rhetoric than it is necessarily reflected in depth chart. The reports have been Austin is still working primarily out of the slot. And then also, I think really the reason to say that if you're Izzani is Austin was a playmaker last year. He made some plays and he has more touchdown catches than Roman Wilson has actual receptions. And Wilson himself has 0 receptions to date, has appeared in 1 game. So it was a little more motivational tactic in my mind to a Roman Wilson, a little more veteran deference to a guy like Austin who's come in and has a resume and made some plays and it's been around the team a little bit longer. So I think all those guys will get a chance. Austin, Wilson, Robert Woods, etc. But to me, that comment was a little more about just kind of the veteran deference and who's proven it and giving a little message to Roman Wilson of, you're going to have to earn this spot.
And it's more, I think, of, in fact, he says, so I think that 2 spot is all Calvin's right now. I think that's, you want to parse these things out. Right now, right now. As mandatory minicamp breaks. I think that's a key component to what Izzani said there. Look, I mean, could this thing obviously fast forward into the regular season and he ends up being the number 2 depending on what you are able to or not able to get done with outside playmaker? Absolutely. But I think the key component of what he had to say, I think it plays a little bit into what you said as well too. Some motivation for Roman Wilson and look, I mean, who was it? Brandon Johnson got talked up a little bit over this past week as well too. So, but right. That's a right now thing, and it's hard to argue with the line of thinking of that as well too. Yeah, he's based on what he did the season that he had last year, he should right now be the number 2 alongside DK Metcalf when you look at this roster in totality.
Agreed. I'm with you, Dave. I know some people will sit there and say, does that mean they're not going to go trade for a receiver? Does that mean they're happy with the group? Izzani's not making those calls. He is not kingmaker in terms of adding outside guys. He can only work with the guys on roster right now. That's all his focus is on, and that's where it should be. So him declaring that does not mean this team's not going to make a move. They're content with their roster as is. As we just talked about, this team clearly looking for some more offensive weapons. So that is not Izzani's purview.
Look, the thing here is it's a positive, and it seems like Calvin Austin's building off of what he did last year. Should obviously be comfortable in this offense at this point, and even though you got a new quarterback coming in, you should be able to adjust fairly well. I like how DK Metcalf says he's a little jitterbug, and even though he is a jitterbug, he's fast. We saw got some glimpses last year of that explosive play component. One of the things that you roll back, the things we talked about when Calvin Austin was coming out of Memphis, and the percentage of times that he touched the football ended up in not only explosive plays but like 25 yards or longer, and we got to see that. We got to see him take a very nice step in his game last season. So he should be number 2 right now.
Right. I think there was big progress he showed as a route runner. His catch radius expanded, still made those big plays. He had a 20-yard reception every 3.6 catches last year. That was right behind George Pickens at 3.5, one of the better marks in the NFL. So that playmaking continued. Can he make plays on the outside? That's going to be a question. Can his game go to a different level? Can he make another jump the way he'd made a jump from 23 to 24? That may be a challenge. Where is that ceiling at for Calvin Austin? I think he can be a good number 3. Can he be a good number 2? That's the question.
That's the thing he's going to have to prove this year.
For sure. Arthur Smith, his offensive coordinator, speaking to the media a couple times, and he's made a couple references to Darnell Washington. There was a one-on-one sit-down interview with Steeler.com's Missy Matthews and was asked about Darnell Washington, and Smith said something to the effect of, I can't help but smile every time I think about Darnell Washington, and talked about his affinity for tight ends, being a former tight ends coach himself in his, grow up across the NFL journey, and talked about the unique skill set that Washington has, and seemed to hint that they need to get him more involved in the offense this year, Dave.
I mean, they could definitely stand to get him involved more in the offense this year, specifically in the passing game, and be interested to see what degree they're able to do that. We just talked about, will they or won't they add another playmaker such as a Jonnu Smith? And if they don't add to that tight end room, there is the possibility that you see a little bit of more Darnell Washington in the passing game. All that said, though, I think we'll be hard pressed to want, barring injury to a guy like Freiermuth or anybody else on this roster. Hard pressed to get a guy like Darnell to like 40, 45 receptions in my head. But anything more than what he's been involved, it's to me, it's not hard to get him involved more in the passing game than what he's been involved so far.
Well, I think he was more involved the first half of last year. I was pretty happy with his usage then, and then it really fell off a cliff towards the end. I've talked about that a couple times before, but here's the quote from Arthur Smith on Washington. He said, quote, "He had some very big plays for us last year, and we got to build off that and change some things up, but he'll be a big asset to us," end quote. Washington himself spoke to reporters, I think on Wednesday, and talked about there were a couple reps where he got split out, either 2x2 or 3x1 backside in some formations we have not generally seen that before. It's happened a couple times. His touchdown against Denver last year on that fade ball, but could we see Washington have more of a stand-up role this year, at least a couple times? That would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely plausible. But all that said, his high last year in receptions in a single game was 4, and only one other time last year he had 3 against Cleveland in a game. So most of the time his usage has been limited to 1 or 2 receptions and at most 4 targets in a game. So,
but do they want to change that?
I mean, it's not whether or not they want to. It should be hard, just a byproduct of the roster and all. It should be hard to at least get him more than 25 targets. All that said, I have a hard time visioning him upping that 25 target number to say 45.
Right. No, I don't think he's going to see a big spike in volume as a number. I don't even know where he would fall in the pecking order, number 4, number 5 weapon in a run-heavy offense. But as I mentioned before, he had only 3 targets over his last 6 weeks last year at 2 catches. That stuff can't happen again.
Sure. I mean, and once again, I don't think it's going to be hard to get his target numbers on average up right out of the chute this year.
But why was it so hard at the end of last year?
I'm trying to think back overall.
I mean, obviously the offense was terrible, but they were also playing from behind. They were throwing more than ever. They weren't sitting on leads. So had that been maybe the factor, you could talk about that. I think the play action game really went away, and Washington makes plays off the play action, those boots in the flat. But I think there was also just, really nothing schemed up for him.
I mean, how many times were you in 11 versus, I mean, if you look at the final 4 games, looks like his offensive snap total went 19, 26, 26, and 22, whereas the games, up until that point, he got into a situation where he was playing the fewest amount of snaps that he played all season during those final 4 games.
That's a good point.
And how we'd have to go back and look specifically, and you look at the teams that they did play, and obviously the outcomes against Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Cincinnati, those were games that they were down, right? So, we'll have to go back and look specifically at the 11 personnel usage versus multiple tight ends and all like that. But he did play the fewest snaps in any single game in those final 4 games.
And Pittsburgh's definitely had trouble possessing the ball against teams like the Eagles and the Chiefs, and the Bengals finale was a dud overall. So that's all fair. Although, could you sit there and say, should they have been in 12 personnel instead of 11 personnel, even playing from behind? Because who put your best guys out there? Was Washington a better player than whoever your number 3 receiver could have been considered last year, Van Jefferson, for example, who ran a bunch of empty routes? So that's a fair point on the snap count being reduced. But I think point is you want to, Washington, the volume's not going to be there, but can he make some plays? Can he be a little more consistently involved in the offense and not go quiet for these big stretches. That's probably something I'm more focusing on.
I mean, can you get him to 30 receptions? He had 19 last year. Yeah, I know it doesn't seem a lot, 11 more, but you know, uh, I think you could definitely get him to 25 receptions. I I think I think it's plausible you can get him to 30 receptions, but anything more than that, I think just lip service this time of year, and would have to have something happen as far as injury to get him above 30 receptions.
Right. Fryermuth's your primary pass catcher. He did a lot of stand-up work last year. Washington is your inline guy. He focused a lot on pass protection last year. Remember that back in training camp, they were really emphasizing that, and that came true, and he was an asset there during the season. So he's not somebody your offense is running through. You're not truthfully going to scheme up a lot of plays with Washington as the primary in mind, those boots in the flat, those rollouts, which are pretty staple in Arthur Smith's system. That's where he's going to be targeted the most as the primary read. But he's not going to be this high volume, like I said, type of a dude. I'm just looking for a little more involvement, a little more consistency, making sure he doesn't get lost. Because if Arthur Smith wants to rely on his philosophy of spreading the ball around, getting everyone involved, that's a guy that made a couple plays for you that was not really involved late in the year.
Look, there ain't nothing wrong with 10.5 yards per reception for a tight end for a guy with his size. Here's the thing I'm looking for the most for out of Darnell Washington. I want to see him take that next step, become a more rounded, well-rounded, dominant blocker in the running game.
I thought he took that step last year. I really thought his blocking took a major step from year one to year two.
Well, that's why I said another step forward within that. I thought there were still some instances, especially on some of those crunches and all like that. I still thought there's room for improvement there, and definitely not yet the mauler or the type guy that he was at Georgia.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. All right, anything else from Arthur Smith or any other the coaches and coordinators who spoke over the week, Dave?
Trying to think who else talked on the offensive side of football. What did Pat Meyer have to say? I don't know if I went back and re-listened to that.
He talked about with Broderick Jones, what's the big thing to work on? Consistency, Meyer said, just being down to down consistent. And he believes not only Jones flipping back to left tackle can help. We've talked about that. Jones himself has discussed that, but playing next to a veteran like Isaac Seumalo could do Jones a lot of good in Pat Meyer's mind.
I just want Broderick Jones to know to play, know the assignment. But playing alongside a guy, because last year a lot of the kibitzing that we had to see Broderick Jones have to have was alongside rookie Mason McCormick. At least having a guy in Isaac Seumalo should help in that degree, and to that degree. But how many times one of the big takeaways that I had last year, I thought that really stuck out on the all 22 was just how many times it seemed like, look, you expect obviously some communication between your offensive linemen on almost a down to down basis, but there were a lot of instances where it seemed like Broderick Jones just needed to ask, which way am I going in this play?
Mm-hmm.
And, so hopefully with familiarity going back, and as we've talked about several times, at least going into this spring, summer as a whole, these are your five. These will be where these five are lined up, no question, barring injury. That's the work that they're going to get at these positions going forward. That should help. I think Broderick Jones has even come out though and said, I'm a couple of weeks away from being completely comfortable back over on the left side. Not necessarily the things you want to hear out of his mouth for a guy that the big narrative has been just getting back over to the left side. But the proof will be in the pudding, I think, when we come out, get into training camp there, and obviously in the preseason and the start of the regular season there. Hopefully these five guys can just stay healthy, like what we saw obviously out of Zach Frazier at center. Hopefully Seumalo's completely healthy to start the season this time around. Mason McCormick's got a full season under his belt. Obviously got Fautano coming back from his injury. Gonna have to have him hit the ground running over there. just as you are with Broderick Jones over at the left tackle spot. So, look, this team's going absolutely nowhere if they don't get a giant step forward out of their offensive line this year. And that's I think the big takeaway when it comes to that unit.
You're right. They need it. It's critical. It's the X factor of the year. It has to be a unit that collectively makes a big time jump. Yeah, I think with Broderick Jones, all those little things help. Say Malu, being next to him, going back to left tackle, but it just comes down to locking in, as Myra said, being consistent, playing with better technique, knowing your assignment, knowing your role. But there was a lot of strained communication last year. You're right; those guys talked a lot, but the number of times that Broderick Jones would end up play looking visibly frustrated with Zach Frazier or McCormick and just seemingly not getting some information passed off to him whenever he was inquiring. Maybe you play next to Say Mahler this year. Maybe that kind of gets cleaned up and is a little bit easier to communicate. But Jones himself just has to lock in. Playing next to Say Mahler does not make blocking Myles Garrett all that much easier. He's going to get some help, but there'll be some times where it's 1-on-1 Garrett and Jones, and he's got to go out there and do the job. So that's going to be his mission. It's a really, really critical year for Broderick Jones.
Yeah, you had an interesting, he's dropped a little bit of weight. You had an interesting side-by-side photo.
Yeah, and I wasn't even looking for it intentionally. I was going back because it felt like whenever he spoke with the media, he sounded to me on first listen a little different, a little more confident. So I wanted to go back to last year to kind of see if he spoke any differently. And honestly, it was kind of about the same. But the thing that stuck out to me just doing that so quickly side by side was how different his body was. And I know it's already been documented. He's lost weight. I'm not breaking any news there. Wasn't trying to, but it just struck me seeing that back to back. You made the comparison, the reference before to Marcus Gilbert. And it literally felt like Marcus Gilbert 2.0 from where Gilbert went when he was a pretty heavy guy to dropping a bunch of weight and really transforming his body. You're seeing the same with Broderick Jones. And does that make it easier to block Myles Garrett? Not necessarily overall, but hopefully you can speak to him locking in, focusing, doing the right things, doing the little things, taking care of his body that will hopefully lend itself to him being in the playbook more, being more locked in, being more focused, being more aggressive and physical, and translating throughout the season. So that's kind of my hope on that.
And as we said, this is a big, big season for him and the Steelers because you got to make the decision next offseason about the fifth-year option with him.
Right. Now, I will say, and he mentioned this whenever he first talked about losing weight during OTAs, he mentioned it again during minicamp. He's talking about losing the weight, but so he can go put it back on the right way. So I don't know if this is him dropping weight to truly maintain at whatever his weight is right now, but to be able to better put on weight whenever that time comes throughout the summer and into the season, I suppose. And then maybe it's also, he didn't say this, but I'm kind of implying that maybe he was getting too heavy last year where he would start heavy and then he would add weight and become even heavier. Maybe now he's thinking I'll be a little bit lighter. So when I do add weight, I don't kind of get too big.
All right. We'll see how he progresses, especially once camp gets underway.
Joey Porter Jr. speaking on the defensive side of the ball to the media after Thursday's practice and talked about getting in Darius Slay's ear and wanting to absorb all he can. Porter's had a lot of good mentors throughout his career, whether it's Patrick Peterson or Dante Jackson and now certainly Darius Slay. Porter also talking about he once again downplayed the idea of matching his gloves to the opponent's jersey to try to reduce penalties. He talked about that's not his focus. There's other things I can focus on and clean up and work on to reduce penalties, which is true. But Dave, wouldn't you want to do everything you can as a player, even if it's just, 1% better, 1% less chance of you getting penalized by color coordinating your gloves to the opponent's jersey? Why would you not want to do that?
This was a hot button for us the last couple of years, specifically, I think last year there as well too. Why wouldn't you? Okay, I mean, and that's something that you don't really even have to concentrate on as far as the technique or anything like that. Just change the freaking color of your gloves to just have it all picked out and ready to go. Couple of days before the game that you get because you'll obviously know the opponent, the color. Look, I'm not claiming it's going to be this miracle fix or anything like that. I don't think anybody is, but why wouldn't you take the simplest things that might be able to help you and change those? If the opponent's wearing white jerseys, wear white gloves. If the opponent's wearing red jerseys, wear red gloves. To me, it just makes too much sense. And look, I know he's not wanting to blame it on that, but if I was in his situation, man, I'm getting those easiest fixes as insequential as they might seem. I'm getting those knocked out and out of the way, and matching my gloves to the player's uniform on the other side, especially if I'm a player that's known for clutching and grabbing.
Right.
Uh, hell yeah. I'm addressing that. Yeah, I know uh, I know it's too easy of a thing to talk about, and people, you guys don't know ball, blah blah blah. But hell yeah, I'm matching my gloves to the opponent's jersey.
Well, some corners swear by it, some corners don't. Ben has talked about in the past that Porter should do it. That seems to be a pretty divisive issue in that community. But the NFL, to me, Dave, is all about gaining every small advantage you can. And I think color coordinating gloves is one of those advantages. Now, is that the main reason? Does he change his gloves and all of a sudden his penalties problems go away? No, the technique is more important. He has to trust his technique more. I think was it Gerald Alexander that spoke about that with basically him not panicking with the ball in the air, making sure we're just playing. Did he say he had to play the ball more or to play the man more? I forget the commentator. It was a good quote that Alexander had. I saw on your timeline a couple of days ago. So those things are paramount. Those things come first, but it doesn't mean you can't consider and also throw in some of the aesthetics, which is your glove choice. And when you're wearing those bright yellow gloves out there that stick out like a sore thumb against any jersey that's not yellow, essentially, you're more apt to getting called. These refs, if they're standing 30 yards away and they're older guys, maybe they don't have the best eyesight in the world, make it harder for them to make the call. And so I think it's one of those things where, if you should be doing every single thing you can to reduce this glaring problem, which are your penalties. Technique comes first, but if you can gain an advantage, maybe you get one fewer call in a year because of your glove color, you do it.
And that's my next statement was going to be, even if it, and you won't know for a fact whether or not it does, but what if it does prevent one more key call against or one call against you, and especially in a key moment in a game.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
it
worth
didn't
it.
take anything other than just switching the color of the glove.
Then it's worth it to me.
All right.
I'm pulling up the quote from Alexander, and I'm just reading. It was a pretty lengthy quote here. He says, I think he's one of the elite guys at the line of scrimmage as far as disrupting releases and getting hands on and stuff like that. What else does he say here? It's not necessarily getting aggressive beyond that combative stage within that 5 yards. And now it's just time to trust the transition, trust his process, trust his coverage ability. And then obviously when he's in a position to be able to defend the ball down the field, it's getting his eyes up and challenging that and going for the ball instead of trying to think about how do I keep the receiver from not receiving the ball. So that's the commentary there. Could also help his interception numbers, only 2 picks in his 2 NFL seasons, was only, 1 interception, I think, at Penn State, not a ball hawk then. So all good things, all good comments from new but returning defensive backs coach Gerald Alexander.
Look, we saw some good things out of Joey Porter Jr. Last year, and he should be expected to take that. I mean, he's experienced now. He's gone against some very, very good wide receivers in the league and in practice as well, too. Man, you go from George Pickens to DK Metcalf, and he's even played against Metcalf in some games, and you get the the Cincinnati wide receivers that he's gone against a couple of times now, obviously over his career. And then you look ahead to next offseason. He's a guy that's going to potentially be looking to get a contract extension with 1 year left on his rookie contract. And this, I know he's probably aggravated still to this day that he did not go in the first round. This could end up being a blessing for him and get money in his bank account even quicker, right? By not having to deal with that 5th-year option and all like that. So this is a big, and look, they're going to need takeaways obviously from this defense, and they're going to need Joey Porter Jr. to be that number one. And what greater conversation to have this time next year about, man, is Joey Porter Jr. actually in position to be one of the top 5 highest paid cornerbacks in the NFL? So just as we talk about is a big season for Broderick Jones, it's a big season for Joey Porter Jr. And if changing gloves, color of the gloves can help you get a step closer to that goal, do it.
I'm with you. I'm still, hopeful, optimistic about Porter. I think he's played overall well his first 2 years, allowed 1 touchdown. His tackling's gotten better. He's facing tough challenges week in, week out. That's not going to change this year. But, if I was him, I would do it because why the heck not? But as long as he cleans up the penalties, regardless of how he does that, then that's all that really matters.
All right.
Anything else from minicamp? Anything else from coaches or players or any other nuggets? I mean, in terms of what we learned, obviously we're not there. We'll be out there at training camp, be able to get eyes on. I don't know if we really even heard a whole lot about performance during minicamp. We heard it a little more in OTAs when it was a little bit fresher and it's kind of a little more lay of the land for some of the reporters out there. I don't know if I heard really any reports of anybody standing out during these last 3 days.
I think my biggest takeaways just globally are, okay, you got, thank goodness you got Aaron Rodgers is in there under contract and working. So that was obviously a big question going into this. So, without a doubt, I think that's a big takeaway. He's there. He was working for 3 days. He's starting to get himself acclimated with teammates and the offense, even though, seem to be individual drill only. So I think that's one of the top takeaways there. I think we talked about it already. Coming out of this thing healthy, seemingly healthy overall is obviously important. Did they ever find out what's happened with Noah Brown over in Washington? Didn't he get carted off? I don't know if they found out the seriousness of that, but you always cringe coming out of OTAs and mandatory minicamps about some of these guys going down with season-ending injuries on non-contact and all like that. So just on the surface, it seems like the Steelers have come out of their off-season practices healthy overall. So I think that's a main takeaway. You've got we knew this would be the case with we talked about it several times. You got all 5 guys on the offensive line playing positions and knowing the positions that they're going to play. So I think to some degree that's a big component of this moving into training camp. Sounds like Derek Harmon's going to get every opportunity under the sun to be a week 1 at least base defense kind of guy. So that's that's a positive overall there. Trying to think what else.
D-line coach Carl Dunbar was impressed, at least by the resume of Daniel Aquale, who should be backing up Derek Harmon this year. And if you can have Harmon, Benton, and Haywood as your starters, and Benton take a jump and Harmon play as expected, and Aquale behind, that's a good defensive line, Dave.
Yeah, look, we were a little bit shocked that they didn't break the bank with Aquale, but it was more than minimum with him, and they could definitely use an upgrade of guys behind the first line guys. When you roll back and think about Montravius Adams and Dean Lowry and some of those other guys that they had last year. I am interested to start hearing more about Aquale once they get to training camp and get those reports from you. But even so, how much I ask, how much can you really learn during practices from the offensive line and defensive line during training camp, Alex, from where you sit?
When they're not in pads, not a whole lot. When they're in pads, you can learn more. They do more drills. They do the one-on-ones. You're in full contact period. So it just kind of depends on the day and the setting in terms of learning more about the trenches. And Aquale really is who he is. He's 31. He's only a 1-year starter, kind of a unique career, a late bloomer in a sense, getting that look in New England last year. Was hurt the year before, missed most of the season. He's a good stout run defender. The pass rush is going to be minimal, but if you can play the run, rotate in, that's fine by me. You need more than 4 guys. I don't want to pretend like that's your 4. That's all you need. Can Y.A. Black become something? Does Loudermilk continue to make incremental gains? Does somebody else surprise? Can DeMarvin Leal make a roster spot depending on where he's even playing? I don't know if he'll be outside back or D-line hybrid. We'll have to wait and see. But if those 4 can be who we hope they can be, then you're off to a good start.
Right. I wanted to ask you, what do you suppose was going on with Cordell Patterson these past 3 days?
You do a better job going through the photos than I do. I know you were questioning if he was
there, though.
It sounds like it. I know somebody had, I think, made mention about Patterson at some point, which rings a bell. I know they posted a video yesterday of them going through some early drills in practice, and we didn't see Patterson in the line where you would expect him to be in with the other offensive guys. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is a thing where he's getting some veteran time off. I don't know if he's dealing with a nagging thing. I don't know if it's let's just keep you safe on the sidelines, Patterson, because we might cut you here soon. I really haven't thought about it a ton, but I don't have a good answer for you
I
either way.
I do kind of wonder if it's just, hey, we're gonna do this. You just go stand over there.
Right.
We don't want you to get hurt,
But then why is he
But
still here? If like
I
that's the
don't
thing,
know.
like, and you
I
got
don't
through
know.
minicamp healthy.
But I did. I went through that video that Mike Pursuta posted, and look, if he wasn't there, we would know about it, right? You would think. There's
I would
no way with
think
all those people that are out there watching this and knowing that T.J. Watt. And look, I mean, he'd be fined anyway. He's not going to get himself fined. So he has to be there. And I think somebody said, I haven't seen any pictures. Maybe I missed something and all like that. But I did kind of find it curious that you going through that drill. And I mean, it was all of them. It was wide receivers, running backs, fullbacks, tight ends, all that. And he was not part of that, at least in that film segment.
But are there some veterans getting some time off that would make sense this time of year? Does Patterson need the reps right now? Arguably, no. So that may also he may have been on the sidelines somewhere. I couldn't tell you.
All right. That did catch my eye.
What caught my eye late last night, Dave, and this saga unfortunately just gets sadder and sadder. We won't spend a lot of time on it. We don't usually talk about this too much because it's not germane to the Steelers right now. But Antonio Brown, according to the Washington Post, has a warrant out for his arrest for an attempted murder charge. This stems from the incident that occurred last month at a boxing match in Miami, Florida. I think people remember this one pretty well. This happened middle of the night. I remember waking up at like 2 a.m. to write about it. Brown details are still pretty unclear, but there was an altercation. There was video at the time showing him getting into a fight with a crowd. He claimed self-defense. He was briefly detained by police at the time. He was then let go. He said on Twitter he was not arrested. Well, now there's a warrant or police are searching for Antonio Brown on this attempted murder charge. There's video of him appearing to chase somebody down, and then off in the distance there's gunshots. We still don't know exactly what all happened, but Brown's been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, really since his trade out of Pittsburgh, but certainly in his post-football career. And so far, this is the most serious allegation against him.
Yeah, and that come on the heels of I think what we were looking yesterday from a play from Joe Hayden intercepting Ben Roethlisberger, and it went back to what year was that? 2010.
10.
Uh you can't help but when you go through some of that game tape, you see Antonio Brown do it. That guy was so damn good, man. I the further that we get away from his playing career, are people going to tend to forget because of all this other garbage that's come
Yes.
along?
Yes. How could you not? It's overshadowing his great on-field play.
Yeah, and I guess that's it. That's the commentary, right? The further that you get away from his playing career with all this other stuff with him being in the news is it going to make it a lot easier for people to forget how good he was for those 5, 6, 7 seasons?
I'll just read the most pressing quote from the Washington Post article. Quote, "The warrant, which was signed by a judge Wednesday, lists a charge of attempted murder with a firearm and calls for Brown to post a $10,000 bond and remain under house arrest pending trial." So that's the headline and notable note there. I posted in our Discord chat last night, Dave, and we had this conversation a lot during his heyday in Pittsburgh, I ran out of words to describe Antonio Brown, the player, and now I've run out of words to describe Antonio Brown, the person, in his post-football career. I mean, what do you say at this point?
Yeah, it's just sad to watch it play out. Not only with him, but any person in general, but especially someone as we follow. This is a team that we write about and have covered for numerous years, and his greatness was without question when he did play. And I think just the overall commentary takeaway is, yeah, you hate to see this kind of stuff further push away how good he was on the field with how bad he's been off the field.
And add the caveats that I'm not making excuses for him, and nor am I a doctor, but he seems to be unwell for a long time. He's even discussed potentially having CTE or, all the ramifications from the hits he's taken over the years, and that seems to be a factor in his personality. So I hope he gets the help that he needs, but obviously he's got a lot of things in front of him right now.
Yeah, but it's hard not to write about something that serious when it pops up like it
Oh,
did
yeah.
last night,
Yeah, I mean, we're going to write about that, regardless of what's happening, with his personal life, whatever the cause of these stories are and his personality and his decision making is, we're going to write about it. It is relevant to talk about, but that was the big headline that dropped late last night. All right, Dave, anything else to talk about, either Steelers related around the NFL and any other news coming in right now?
Not that I can see right now. It will be interesting to watch how some of these things play out around the league, especially with who is it, Shemar Stewart situation.
Well, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Well, give me, you're big into contracts. Who's right? Who's wrong? What's fact? What's fiction?
I mean, it sounds like the Bengals are just trying to play some games here, with all this. And, I understand second year. He was a first rounder, right? For them?
Stewart, yes, he was. Their second round
Yeah.
pick, I believe, also remains unsigned, but I believe he is practicing Demetrius tonight and going through minicamp.
I mean, only the Bengals, right?
So this is the debate that I've seen on Twitter is this clause that appears to be where if he were to get hurt or if he were to get cut, then he would void future year money. Is this a clause that does not get put into typical rookie contracts, or is this something new the Bengals are trying to do? There's some debate about how new this clause is in this contract.
Look, I mean, you look around. If agents, especially when it comes to first rounders, are going to do everything they can to protect all the money of their clients, especially these first round guys. So if other guys other than Stewart were having this issue, it seems like it'd be more prevalent. So this feels like just feels like more of a Bengals thing than anything.
What struck me, this would void potential future money, is my understanding of it. But first round contracts are supposed to be fully guaranteed. So it seems the Bengals are trying to have an out card on a contract that's supposed to be completely guaranteed.
Yeah, our buddy Paul Dehner, I think, recently wrote it is his understanding they're offering the same language in this clause as a majority of first round contracts, and for reference have offered the exact language of the pick before Walter Nolan and after Gray Zabel. It's different than that of Murphy and Mims the last 2 years. And the Bengals generally structure contracts differently than most teams with guarantees, which matters. But the language being proposed for this specific clause is, from what he's saying, is common around the NFL. I'm trying to remember if Joel Corey has chimed in on this. I haven't drilled down a lot in this, but you're talking about the Bengals here, right? And this is known as one of the chintzier, type of organizations out there. So I have to research it more, but it sounds at this point that he's, unless some things change, he's prepared to miss the start of training camp.
Yeah, it's looking that way. I mean, you would think it's going to get resolved at some point, but the Bengals have infamously taken a long time to get deals done before. I remember watching just recently there was a video on the Andre Smith negotiation. Now, to be fair, that was back under the old CBA when rookies didn't have the structure they have now, and it was pretty common for holdouts to happen and guys to take a long time to sign. But that was a thing with him way back when. So just to recap,
in reply to what Paul Dehner put out there, though, I'm guessing this is Stewart's representation, LAA Sports Entertainment. They responded back to this tweet from Paul Dehner. Hi, Paul. Feel free to message us if you'd like accurate information. Thanks.
Okay.
So
yeah, because what Paul's saying is this is common around the NFL, but maybe new to the Bengals, but maybe his agency is disputing that notion.
Right.
That's what I'm just trying to figure out.
That's why I want to put both sides of this,
Sure.
out there. So I would have to dig down deeper into this, Alex.
Right.
But that's going to be fun to watch, as is the whole situation with Trey Hendrickson over there as well, too. Look, their defense was their defense heads into this season's kind of suspect, as it was, and you not going to have two good pass rushers over there. They better be prepared to score about 40 points.
For sure. Yeah, I know I don't make this Bengals depot, but just it's interesting to kind of gawk at the situation there. And it's important because the Bengals defense has been the Achilles heel, and their top pass rusher, their top defensive player, one of the best players on the team, probably right behind Burrow and Chase and Higgins is probably Hendrickson, number 4. He's in a messy situation there that has really gotten really ugly overall, and now their first-round pick has a bunch of issues. So, and they released Jermaine Pratt, who signs with the Raiders. He was one of their top guys at off-ball linebacker last year. So, a lot going on in Cincinnati. We'll watch it from afar like a car crash.
All right. Shall we do some emails here?
Yeah, let's get through some reader emails and close out today's show while I have the U.S. Open. It's on Peacock until 1 p.m. I hate this stuff's online. It frustrates me to not. I sound like you right now, an old man shaking my fist at the cloud.
All right, Caleb Zaborski is back in here. Good morning from Fort Myers. He says, got a couple of questions. What Steelers team, in your personal opinion, has been the biggest disappointment in your lifetime as far as the expectations go? Also, what has been the best Steelers game you have ever watched in person or on TV? I had a couple of things pop in my head. I mean, obviously, the Killer Bees, a couple of them Killer Bees seasons a couple of years ago. You got you had such such a good unit overall, top to bottom. What year was that?
I mean, there were a couple of years, but I was thinking 2017 was 13-3 season, first place. You then get upset by Jacksonville in the first round was a real big letdown.
Yeah, that has to come to my mind first and foremost when you talk about, especially recent teams that have been, disappointments as far as expectations go. What has been the best Steelers game you ever watched in person or on TV? Most of those obviously be TV in my instance, and I think Alex's as well. Several of them come to mind. Non-playoff related. Steelers versus Green Bay several years ago when Ben and Aaron Rodgers, I guess, dueled and came down to Mike Wallace play it in the end zone near the end. The Ben Roethlisberger games of throwing the 5 and 6 touchdowns in a game against the Colts and the Ravens back to back. Those are obviously high up there. The immaculate
extension or reception. Okay.
Extension has to be up there as far as key games.
Did you watch the Immaculate Reception as it
I
took place?
I was too young to actually remember it.
But did you watch it, or do you remember where you were, or stories of where you were?
No. I mean, that was 72.
72.
I was 4.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Okay,
4.
I get you.
So no, I don't have. I have recollection of being a little butt to my dad, who was a Cowboys fan at the time, and being, that's from what my parents told me, my earliest recollection of rooting for the Steelers, but I don't have I don't have direct recollection of the game.
Okay, gotcha. So you would say anything pre-Ben, anything in the 90s that sticks out to you, any memorable, even if it didn't mean anything in season's end, any games that stuck out?
I mean, look, I can vividly remember watching the Super Bowls, the last couple of Super Bowl, last several Super Bowl wins, specifically the game against the Rams, I can remember watching those games, the stalwart catch. I remember that. And obviously over time, we've gone back and rewatched those games several times. But I mean, as far as in live, watching them on TV, most of that, I don't remember much about for my own dubious reasons, things that happened in the 90s and 80s. I remember the playoff loss to the Chargers, and obviously the end of the game against the Colts, the Hail Mary from Harbaugh and stuff like that. But as far as, I guess that I remembered in the moment. Most of the games that I mentioned, more recently, the Packers, and as far as best games, non-playoff related, I think I've hit on most of those.
Yeah, putting aside the Super Bowl wins, obviously those are the obvious answers to give. For me, the answer is easy. 2007, the win over the Ravens, Monday night, the 75th anniversary game. All the Steelers legends in town. They blow out the Ravens 38-7. They go up 35-0 or 35-3. James Harrison plays still to date the best individual performance I've ever seen a player personally watching the game live. I mean, he completely dominated the Ravens. They had no answer for him. All the sacks and interceptions, and I mean, just top to bottom, that was pure dominance against a rival, primetime fashion on a historic night, honoring some Steelers legends and really playing for those legends. I thought was really special. So I was just a fan back then. I was 14 years old or something. So I was just a kid. But to me, that game will always live on as the pinnacle of the Steelers beating down an opponent and beating down the Ravens, no less.
All right. Let's see what else we have in here. Richard Jameson writes in, do you think Aaron Rodgers will be better for developing this young offensive line than Mason Rudolph would be? How much can a quarterback help develop an offensive line?
It's a good question. Probably would have to think about it some. There certainly can be an impact on it in terms of getting you in the right place and your snaps to throw time, knowing where to go with the football, escapability. Rodgers won't have that, but that can also be a factor. But end of the day, the line just has to play well, and the quarterback can only, I think, can dictate the margins of that play, but it's not going to dictate the overall assessment. Rodgers is not going to make this offensive line great. Rudolph's not going to make this line terrible, or vice versa. The line's going to be the line. The run block is still a big component of it too, which the quarterback has less control of the outcomes there. So it can help on the fringes, but overall, Broderick Jones has to block Myles Garrett. Mason McCormick has to block 3 techs and reach block somebody on an outside zone run. That's not going to be dictated by Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph or Will Howard or anybody at quarterback.
Agreed. This one from Doug Williams is way too long. Doug, I appreciate the email, but this is just going to be way too long to read here. Craig Sampson's got one in here. Does not understand why they let James Daniels leave. We are already uncertain about our offensive line, and JD was our best offensive line player when healthy. We have cash and we have to spend it, right? He says, I know he's injured now and expensive, but good players cost money. Offensive line is crucial, especially for the Steelers, so why not lock up the guard spot with a proven player? I realize he's hurt. I'm not going to read all of this overall because this one's kind of long as well too. But you did have a guy coming off of a serious injury. You had a team that's obviously had invested in a Mason McCormick to go younger. As good as James Daniels, is or was as a player, I think there was a little to be left as desired, as far as maybe per se the nastiness and all overwent there. And I know they had to catch. What did he end up signing for this
3
offseason?
years, $24 million with Miami.
Yeah, that was a little bit rich, I think, overall. Would they have taken him back on a little bit cheaper contract? Possibly.
I think this decision got made during the 2024 NFL draft. That's one reason why they took Mason McCormick. The belief was that Daniels, entering the last year of his deal, would have a fine season, a good season, and the guard market, as we've talked about a lot, really got hot. A lot of guys getting paid close to $20 million per year, and Daniels would, prime of his career, still at however old he is, 26, 27, a pretty young guy, would get paid. Pittsburgh was not interested in paying all that money for him, and so they were going to move on. Now, the injury changed something and certainly impacted his market value as the contract he signed indicates, but I still think Pittsburgh had the mindset of we're moving on. We drafted McCormick to replace, and of course, McCormick replaced him after Daniels suffered that injury against the Colts. So I think that the guard market, already having his replacement in mind, led them to move on from James Daniels, a decision that I think everyone understood was going to happen pretty shortly after the draft in 2024.
Right, because remember, even Daniels said there was no talk about
Right.
extension and all like that. So, all right. One last one from Austin Hackett. We'll get out of here, Alex. This one's about Tyreek Hill. Wondering your thoughts about hypothetically trading for Tyreek Hill. Obviously, seems like a long shot, but if I'd read his contract details correctly, it seems like Tyreek could possibly be cut by the Dolphins or whatever team he plays with in 2025 after the season, similar to Devontae Adams last year. Wonder if Dave could provide a breakdown of if it's feasible from a cash cap standpoint for Pittsburgh. It looks like he has $15.8 million roster bonus due on 8/31 that I'm curious if it'd make it more likely to trade. All right, just long and short of this with Tyreek Hill. I think you got to look at Tyreek Hill, the player, first and foremost here. I mean, this is a guy that you just got rid of Plaxico Burress. I mean, Plaxico Burress. George I don't know why I'm talking about Plaxico Burress. You just got rid of a guy in George Pickens, and not because of his play on the field, right?
Sure.
Tyreek Hill is somebody that's always in the news for stuff off the field as well too. Very talented player. I just think it all starts with culture and fit in the locker room. I think that's number one why I don't think it's even worth having a discussion beyond that. He just does not fit culture and everything that goes along with it. A very talented guy. He also is now what 30 or 31 years of age as well too. As far as his contract goes in 2025, looks like he's got an option due on August 31st. He's guaranteed salary $27.65 million. It looks like in 2025. Cap hit as it stands right now looks to be 27 point almost 7. Those are enough reasons not to trade for any of that. If you're looking beyond this season, what he's got a roster bonus due next March and all like that. Is Tyreek Hill going to be a member of the Miami Dolphins on March 18th of 2026? Odds are probably good that he's not going to be.
I'm not too sure. I think how this year goes depends on a lot for the future of that core. It's a group that's had talent but can't put it together, and obviously too his injuries have played a big role in that. But I think this year will be a big season to kind of determine the future of that group.
I think overall, I think you just label this the choir boy aspect of it all, and yeah, not many. We could define that out. Have a good conversation about that, but before it's not even worth talking about the money aspect of it as it is. I think the player and the human being, and just why would the Steelers want to go down this road?
Yeah, it's a little from the frying pan into the fire kind of a thing. But
I mean, you can always make it work from a cash and cap standpoint. I just don't see the Steelers wanting to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I was going to make the point, and I agree with you on Hill. But if Pittsburgh, they want to go add another big money receiver, why couldn't they? They could do it. And you're not saying they can't, but I'm just talking out loud. Like, who are they spending the money on? They're not paying quarterback a lot of money. They probably won't do that next year either if they go draft a rookie. So why not go spend big money on a receiver?
Yeah, and why? I mean, if they were in this position where they could have spent the money on George this offseason as well too.
Yeah, well, I understand why they didn't do that. That's fine. But if there was somebody that you felt confident, I mean, I just say that to say because the response often is, well, you just paid DK Metcalf a bunch of money. Are they really going to pay two receivers? And I get that instinct. I have that as well. But when you sit there and think about it, why not? Why couldn't they pay two receivers?
I mean, they could. And obviously from, if they wanted to go above and beyond even what I think they're going to spend in cash, there's nothing says they can't. And if it got in a crunch from a cap situation, you still got Pat Freiermuth. You could go out there and restructure his contract and free up another $7 million that way. So there's always ways to get it done. In most seasons with most teams, but they're not going to go down that path with Tyreek.
Sure, I agree over. I'm just kind of giving you the bigger picture thought.
I think we got through all the emails, at least here that come in recently here. So with that, we're about an hour and a half as usual. What are we going to talk about on Monday, Alex?
You know what? They always find a way to give us something to talk about, so we'll figure it out. If not, we'll do our Seinfeld show, talk about nothing for 90 minutes, as we're getting pretty good at doing.
All right. In the meantime, we'll have enough stuff up on the site, I think, to keep people busy. I'll be starting my 90 and 30 series, actually 91 and 30 series here pretty soon. I think we got a couple other ideas floating around for series on the site for the next 5.5 weeks or so on top of it. So you can count on us trying to keep people busy and something to read throughout the rest of the off season as we start moving forward to training camp. We will be back on Monday. So in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate or hit the ad-free button and follow the directions that way. So hope everybody has a great weekend and Father's Day this weekend, right?
Yes, on Sunday.
All right. Happy Father's Day to you fathers out there. So until Monday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.